Alright, welcome back guys. We've got part 4 of our tutorial here. We're going to be looking at our advanced distributions of our trees and grass. We're going to be looking at our atmospheres, the city in the background, and a couple of little other things, setting up the sea, really basic. I'm going to try and get this through before my power cuts out, because if you can see up behind me, there's a bit of wind. We've got a big storm coming through, so hopefully my power doesn't cut out during this video. So let's get started. We're going to tackle this on a difficulty basis, so we'll get the really hard stuff out of the way first, and then we'll start into the little nooks and crannies. That way you can get the guts of your scene down, and then if you want to go in a different direction with the atmospheres, then you can just skip over that section. Alrighty, so we've got our scene here as we had before in the previous section, and we're going to look at our distribution of our trees through here, and this is what we're controlling, the distribution of the grass based on these trees. So the better our trees are distributed, the better the grass can be controlled. So in our material, we've got three remaining ecosystems to add. We've got to edit. We've got the grass ecosystem, which is just in this mountain fields mix. We have our trees, which all we've done to restrict these is in the presence tab, and I'll show you that soon. And these are the main trees which you see through here. And then on top of that we have our river trees, and they're the ones that flow right down to the river, the riverbed you can see there, or the edge of the river banks rather. If I zoom out, I can show you. They're these ones through here. So they look like they are actually going into the water, but they're not. So first one we're going to do is the trees. We've got our ecosystem on top of all our materials, and add in these three trees, and we'll go to our density tab, and the variable density is where we're going to control the tree shapes. We want to get some nice gradients from black to white, but so that we also get a petering out sort of effect, because we don't want sharp edges, for instance. So you can leave all of that as it is. I've kept decay near foreign objects on purely because at the end of the day I populate the river trees first, so that I really get a lot of trees in around the river, and then I go to my next trees, and I don't want these to double up and populate on top of the river trees. So okay, so in the variable density tab, we'll right click edit function, and you can ignore those. All I've used is a variable noise fractal, which I'll add in here. Sorry, that was the noise node. It's the fractal here, and this is what it looks like. And I'm using the cellular Voronoi patterns for one, and the Perlin noises for the other. So I believe that what I've done is actually loaded. You can load up a well, I've lost a hard drive in the last day, so I don't have all the presets anymore. But you can just load up a preset, and then add the miscellaneous style turbulence. And so by default, I'll just get rid of that as well, and I'll show you right from the beginning. So add a variable noise fractal, and make sure that the first noise is cellular patterns Voronoi, and second one is your Perlin noise. The filter, if you reset, you can see that we just get the sort of the typical Voronoi pattern that you can see, but it's inverted, so you get those billowy sort of effects. So by fiddling around with this, we can just create a little bit of variation and create those circles that we like. So there it is there. In general, the only thing that we need to change here, because we can control all the gradients later, but the thing we want to get right is the scale. So I'm just going to edit this because this is a little bit, I don't want it to go from black to grey to black again. So I want this overall to go up and not to overlap too much on itself. So like that there I didn't want. Okay, so in order to, we'll link this up to the altitude, and in order to get our, to break up these circles, what we want to do is add a miscellaneous style turbulence node. So come here to the turbulent node, add that. It's by default, I believe, it's on miscellaneous turbulence, and you want to link it into the origin, I believe it is. So we extract the parameter by clicking the lightning node. You can grab the top of that, link it in, and you can automatically see this gets started to break up by the default values. So we want to just play around with these and get a big sort of sweeping feel to it. Like this sort of effect is probably not too good because there's too much noise in it. So we can play around with the harmonics, make a bigger sweep. The amplitude is a bit too strong. Scaling, let's see what that is. That's probably good. That's a good one to change if you want to stretch them out. Like if I crank that right up, you're getting a real extreme distortion there. The repeat, I find, don't normally change that, but it really, I mean, a lot of these can be doubled up if you want them to. So let's try and get a nice little look for this one. Let's turn up the repeat. Okay, so if you're finding that you're only getting a few certain look by using this, set it to something that you like, reasonably like, and then come in and actually try and change the fractal, because by changing the fractal you'll change the way that the turbulence is affecting the fractal, because you do have different features. So you might find that changing probably the largest feature will be the main thing to change through there. And I'm going to go back in and actually I'll reset this first, and I'll come back in and smooth that out. Probably too much of a contrast there. So we want to bring these back in. There we go. And my turbulence again is too intense. There we go. So I'll press OK on that, and if I was to populate now, I'll probably get a very different effect. But the if you're trying to go for if you like this distribution, and then actually I'll cancel that because that's going to take a while. If you like this distribution but you're trying to control the density at certain areas, then use the overall filter here, and you can also stretch out the scale. So sometimes what I do is reduce the Y or the X to stretch out this in relation to the camera. So as I can see now, I'll clear my rivers because they're around there and they're confusing us. There's too much just speckledness through here. So if I increase the contrast through here, bring this, say, down, and this up, and this will increase the strength, essentially, of these features. So we'll wait till that appears. There we go. So we're starting to see. If I show you on, I'll go and maximize this. and I'll show you on my chalkboard, you can see these general shapes through there, where there's just a slight bit more dense areas. So if I crank this up to 75%, and let's say make it even stronger. So in this, the black areas are zero density, and the white areas are full density. So you might like that, you might not. It really depends. Do you want big forests with pathways in between, or do you want big green fields with pathways of pine trees? Now, if you want the pathways of pine trees, well, you can clearly see now we have that sort of thing. And this other area, these areas will be filled in with grass. But if you want the opposite effect, edit the filter, click the flip button, populate, and we'll get some big trees through here, and we're going to have pathways of grass going around. There you go. So in this case, these pathways are a little bit too thin. We probably wouldn't notice it from the flat angle of our camera. So in that case, what I would do is edit the filter again and crank down this point so that we get full density down and then quickly depleting density, because you still want full density at some point. So let's try something like that. Actually, what I'm going to do to clip off the bottom ranges, I want to have zero density at that point there. So that way I'm just going to get thicker pathways essentially. I'll populate that and should be able to. Yeah, we do have a bit. It hasn't quite affected it, probably due to the density. There is a little bit of a pathway through there. It's been widened out. But if we put it up to 100%, we'll be able to see. The only I try to avoid 100% because it will take a lot longer to populate. There we go. So the pathways, they're still not quite thick enough, but they're a lot better. And we have this really nice fade out in the size. You can see these here are nice and small. Same with here. There's this arm that comes out this way, and they sort of become smaller. The instances become smaller as they become less dense, and that's because of our scaling shrink at low densities. Okay, so I'm going to flip this back to the other way, and I'll have to set that back to 0.2, but that's going to take ages to populate later. Let's just set it to 1, and I'm going to have to well, actually what I'll do is I'll just cancel that, so I've got my old distribution here. And okay, so now that we've got our distribution of the grass, that's the hardest, sorry, of the trees, that's the hardest part out of the way. The next bit, we go into scaling to adjust your scaling to whatever realistic size you want. I've got shrink at low densities so that we get a bit of variation. I've only put maximum of size variation of 1.2 purely because we're on a horizontal view. So if I show you, the camera plane here is looking very flat along our terrain. So any height differences that we have are going to be very pronounced, particularly in the distance, even though they'll be smaller. Whereas if we had a top-down view, like say this, even though this is orthographic down, you wouldn't notice the differences between the heights. So you might go with a higher setting for your variable size. In the color, I typically load up just a random function. In this, I've just gone with a variable noise fractal just to give it some sort of change in color, and then just crank down the influence. So this way, if it's at 0, this will have no effect. If it's at 100%, it'll change the color entirely of the trees. So at less than 50%, you can it adds to the quality of the color in the trees. And if you look at these trees through here, we can see there's a light patch there, a light patch here, light patch there, and there. So you just get that subtle variation in color. Okay, for our presence, I'm just going to populate these again, and this will be again based on your own scene and the heights and etc. But essentially what we want to do in terms of the whole environment is we want to restrict our trees to only grow on the lower areas, so the lower altitudes, that is. So it's a little bit hard to show you here, but actually we want them to sort of come up to that point and come everywhere else, but not up here. So this is probably a little bit too high, so I can decrease the if I go by object, which it should have been on, it was for some reason on the meter values. Okay, so now we can still see we've got trees up there. We don't want that, so turn it down. So I'm using the larger tree instances because I don't want to waste time populating millions and millions of instances. I mean, this is 1,000, which is well and truly enough to get the overall look. It's at least, especially when doing presence as well. So it's probably still a little bit too high. I've got the fuzziness at the top set to 35%, so that tends to think of that as like a blurring at whatever the top range you set. So if you set this to 0.5 or 0, it won't. If it's at 0, it won't go too halfway up the mountain. It'll blur, so it'll go a little bit over and a little bit below. And same with any of the fuzziness as well. Slope range we set to 60%. Again, that's because our angles here, 60% is probably about there, and we don't really want them to be on anything steeper. It might actually be right there, but it just helps to control it so they're not on cliff faces. Once again. Okay, so you can just have a look at these settings, pause the video if you want, and have a look at them all. For our river trees, we're going to come to our grass in a moment. I'm just going to set up our river trees really quick, add the young fir tree, and in our presence, the main thing we want here is our presence. So actually, in this case, I want it to be relative to C. And I've just done this by eye when looking at the population. If I clear out everything else, let's come in here. So what I want is I want these trees to come right down to my river plain, and also up to fill in this area through here. So to do that, I've edited it by so in the river trees, relative to the sea. That way I can adjust the values. Now I've got a plane which is also on top of our sea level, so that's why I'm going with 3 meters. I've turned off decay near foreign objects because what I found was that the trees weren't getting close enough to the water plane when the decay near foreign objects was turned on, because that will actually make the trees stop growing where there is water. So I've turned that off and just controlled it with our altitude range. Again, the fuzziness at the top is just to peter out the and feather out the instances that occur. And I want it to be all over this terrain, so I want it to, in terms of slope range, we want it to be as much as possible. So if I'm to populate that, I've got it set to 55% density. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% or like really dense, because we're still quite a flat camera angle. So in terms of that, we don't need to have a full density for our trees, because they'll cover up the ground quite nicely. So again, yeah, 1.5 size variation, shrink at low density. These are sort of standard things. I generally try and change them a little bit. Don't copy and paste. You know, have 1.2 and 20%, and because you just end up with a generic scene. You can also see that I haven't used all of these types of trees. I used the young fir tree because river trees that are around rivers will be a little more lush. They probably, well, depending on the area, they could be bigger or smaller than your standard, depending on the erosion. So, but in general, I just go with a more lush color. Same sort of thing here. As you can see, the colors of the trees have the same effect. Okay, so finally, for our advanced distributions, in order to get this grass populating, we don't have to. We just want the grass to fill in the areas around our trees. So if I populate this, and I'm just going to move it up because it will take too long. It takes about 2-3 minutes at 0.2. Once again, this was not my, wasn't so much because of my own choices as the client wanting a really big scale. So it worked. It just took a long time. So that's why I decided not to use dynamic population, because it can take a long time the first time you render it. Particularly if you're just changing it every time you render and you're getting a new type of density, for instance, and that has to repopulate, and it just takes forever. Okay, so the grass that I'm using is an underwater grass. Now, it's not actually an underwater grass. It's the acacia grass seedling, and what I've done is I've used the tutorial, which is on the Eon Software's YouTube channel, on animating plants with the eco-phasing system, which has just come out in View 10, and that gives us this final tab here, which we'll be using. So I'll step you through how to populate the grass first, assuming you are just using any kind of grass like the stock standard view grass. In our general tab, there's something has gone wrong here. This is supposed to be affinity with layer, but oh no, I've used decay near foreign objects. Now usually I'll use with grass, well, with two ecosystems, I prefer to use the distribution control, and these two functions here allow you to push and pull ecosystems towards each other. So with the river trees, I can, if I go affinity with layer 50%, those river trees will be pulled towards the trees below them. But with the grass being underneath all this, and it has no other ecosystem below it in this list, it does obviously lower down, but not directly below it, so this is disabled. So in our density, I've put the decay near foreign objects to 3%, leave the fall off at 0, and that's fine. And populate near below foreign objects will do, for instance, if we have a pine tree like this. I'm a horrible drawer, but you'll have grass there. Populating below foreign objects means it will populate through here and here as well, instead of just decaying near the whole palm tree. It's sorry, the whole pine tree itself. I've also lowered the instances into the ground. This was just to get the larger size, but then just to get the tips, so that we would only see the tips. It was just a aesthetic sort of choice of mine. Okay, and the presence, again, I've used the same altitude controls, except that because we don't really need to worry about our altitude constraints, because I don't know why these are going to meters, but this snowy purple stripes material is appearing only on our lower portion of our terrain, so it should just be through here, if that preview window will update. It doesn't seem to be wanting to, but I'll leave that highlighted. So in general, the presence will be controlled by the parent material anyway, so we don't have to worry too much about where the grass, whether the grass is going to come right up to the top of the mountains. There we go. It's starting to update now. You could change the slope constraint if you want to have the grass only on the flatter areas, but I found that if you want to have rolling hills, you'll need to use a higher slope range anyway. And also, it's with the rolling hills, it's really great to with the grass populating over all of it. It allows it forces the breakup of the sun's light. So if I show you our image here, you can see over on the in these green fields on the left, the shadows. There's actually no soft shadow in the renderer. It's just that there's so many ecosystem instances that they're breaking up the shadow themselves and blocking it. Okay, so I'll switch over now to the grass animation. I'm just going to be skipping through it really quick because it's already online anyway, and I probably actually won't be able to show you it all because I don't have any of the grass plants. That sucks. Well, what I'll do is show you a let's go to YouTube grass. So here's the link. You can view 10 ecosystem phasing, and it's Dave Burdick, who's from Eon Software, and he'll step you through the way of animating this this plant and looping the animation, and then applying it to a terrain to get a flowing sort of current animation. I'll skip to the end, and there you go. You can see it there. And we've used this in our, apologies for not being able to show you that. I lost a 1.5 terabyte hard drive, my business drive, yesterday, so I haven't been quite recovered from that. But in the animation, once you've animated your underwater grass, which is essentially you're just animating it from stand up to curve down, and then back to the stand-up position, and then you save that as an animated VOB. You can actually load that up. It'll be part of the project files. And in the animation tab, set the time offset from 0 to 6, which essentially tells tells View that we want the offset and the animation to take 6 seconds. And the number of variations to a high number, you can go anywhere from 50 to 200 will look good. And loop animation phasing. Then sorry, I'll just cancel that. click on the lightning bolt, and this is how we control the animation point throughout our terrain to get that wavy feel that Dave Burdett was showing in the previous thing. So add a noise node and link it up, replace the constant there, and that in general will do. You might have to change the scale of it, but if I come back and I'll clear out our trees, so we don't need them, and let's just increase the scale of these so it doesn't take too long. Still says 1,000,000 objects because that tiny single blade grass. Alright, so the grass is everywhere, but what you can't quite see it, but if I grab another camera, I'll come right down into these, and you'll be able to see some of the instances at different rotation, depending on that fractal that we added in the animation tab. Okay, so just while that's rendering, you can see through here and here the shadows getting broken up, and this is because of that the rolling hills that we've got. We don't have any soft shadows, but the light gets to penetrate certain areas a little bit differently because of the size variation in our grass plants as well as the rolling hills. Okay, so if you have a trained eye, you'll be able to see this area is animated one way. This area is animated as well at a certain point. There's a bunch of plants through here where there's a variation through there as well. Otherwise we can just keep waiting until it's done its next pass. There's also these through here. There's a general difference in the highlight. Now this is a really expensive way of rendering because we're rendering every single blade. We're animating the animation gets baked, so at render time it's not too bad, but it's just the fact that there's a single blade of grass for everything in here. But what it does allow us to get is the variation in highlights that you'd normally see in green fields of rolling grass. Okay, so it's a lot more clear through here and here that we've got these different highlights. You can see these have a highlight which is similar to these as well. These are all sweeping in the same direction, and generally what you want to do is get something that sort of gets a sweeping continuous, almost like a wave of wind. But you can fiddle around with that, and the animation, this fractal here is a fantastic way of doing that. So probably for our circumstances that fractal was too small in scale, so if I move that back up and go populate again, I'll do a smaller render this time to save us time. Come on. And this should get a more consistent look to our current view. So we should have a nicer flow of and more consistent flow of our grass blades. Now, what I've actually also used is a rotation control in your density. I think it's density. no, it's scaling and orientation. You have a maximum rotation degree, and I'll show you that in a minute. And what I've done is actually used a large scale fractal to control the rotation of the plant. So here you can see that we've got a nicer line through there of these plants tend to be bending towards that direction. Then we've got these guys going this way. We've got another bunch through here which are different, and it's a little bit too difficult to see anything in the distance. But I'll show you in our grass layer scaling and orientation. This is our rotation point here, and normally you just have a maximum angle, but what I've done is actually click the lightning bolt and connected it to a grainy fractal with a huge stretch to it. And you could use the same sort of purlin, just a really nice fade, and essentially it's a little bit difficult to say to explain how this affects the rotation, but if you think of your grass piece as that's the orientation, so that's at 0 degrees, that would be white. At grey it would be like this, and then at black it would be back up to white again. So you get this sort of from black to white, you get them all arrayed around in a circle. So you don't really want to have high contrast areas like this, but because I've used a larger scale of I've just done it by eye and figured that particular grainy fractal will work. So I'll see if I can find a good example for you in the viewport. Yeah, you can see, there's a good one. See this here? That is due, those 4 plants are due to that grainy fractal. And there's a couple of others that's not as strong though, through there. That's all the grainy fractal is, controlling the rotation of those plants. But those are probably, they're the best example. Okay, so we've got our last couple of things, and once the computer decides not to hang on me, what we'll be doing now is setting up our atmosphere and the city. The city is really simple. I've used the Dystopia city blocks that come with View and just squash them and change them, and change the materials to a whiter, shinier sort of utopia kind of city. I have imported some 3D models that I have that I've grabbed from the Google 3D warehouse, because you can get some iconic sort of tall buildings from that. I'm just going to open up View again. Stop wasting time on waiting for that. The other thing we want to do, if we switch back to our image, on the left you can see the fog area. Now initially the client wanted a clearer scene, but with the clearer scene came the cost of the depth, and we lost that depth. So what I did is I constricted the fog in View to just that left hand portion, and the way I actually did that was not inside View, but I rendered 2 images, one of the whole scene, and then one of just that left section with the fog in it. So here's our city, and I've got a bunch of spike towers that you can see look like that, and they're just to give a central sort of radial view to or radial look to the city. Now if you look in the viewport here on the left, you'll see that the city is tilting, and the reason that is it's kind of a good and bad thing that View does. View, as you get towards the edge of the image, it skews the image and bends it out, which is typically what a camera will do as well. But in this sense, I wanted a illustration of a city. So what I did, in order to combat that, with a city group that was oriented straight up and down, we ended up with an image on the where the city on the right was sticking out like this, which looked a little bit silly. So I just rotated it inwards. Okay, so I can't show you how I've made this because I don't have the dystopia assets, but although I can, if you just jump into another camera, let's go over and I'll have a show you them closer up. So there they are there, just all arrayed. I've done them relative to the camera, so they're not they're not realistically heights, and there's no roads in there. They're just placed in as an illustrative sort of representation of the city. Okay, so you can see them up there on the right, and they look fine for what they're worth. Okay, so when I render, I'm just going to clear off our terrain so I'm not rendering any trees. But when I render the sea, the ocean in this, with this particular atmosphere, we end up having a very flat, well, not flat, it's you can't see the horizon very well. And we didn't want this. We wanted a horizon which was quite distinct. As you can see in this, we've got a nice hard line. Well, it's not so hard, but it's a defined line. And if you see in this image, there's absolutely nothing there. So this is another place where multiple renders came in handy. The ocean plane is just a simple sea, ocean water. I believe there's no displacement, so you could probably tick that to get a better specularity. I tend to bump up the highlights of the global intensity and the global size, because if you see this spot here, when they're down at the view defaults about here, they're kind of plastic, and I prefer when they're a lot more specular. And I haven't changed any of the default features because we can do it inside Photoshop and edit things there. But the atmosphere, I've gone with a cool winter sunrise. Like, I wanted to give across the feeling that we were in a cool climate, but it was a warm, inviting, crisp sort of atmosphere. So I set the light balance to 90%, always on global radiosity. If I have to go lower, I will, but generally for a still image, global radiosity is what I'll use. So 90% strength, this increases the strength of our shadows. I increased the light intensity because I wanted in the early morning I wanted it to be even stronger direct light and softer shadows and softer shadow areas. The radiosity gain probably isn't doing much at all, except for just putting a little bit more color into the scene. And in order to negate some of the blackness that's caused by having such a high balance in the sunlight, I've increased my skydome lighting gain to 7. And that essentially, you've got your direct light coming down, and then you have your dome light, which is a uniform light across the whole scene. So that's just increasing that. Got no clouds, and the settings for the atmosphere, I won't go into them because they're pretty much all standard. Well, I'll go into a few of them, but not the colors. I haven't really changed them except for the haze color, and the reason I changed the haze color is I just simply prefer to work with a darker haze, and then use a lower ground density for the haze. So if I crank that up and double click, you've just got this really black sort of look, but I prefer to just use a lower setting. The aerial perspective is an interesting thing. If you look at if I increase the fog ground density and add an aerial perspective of 1, I'm just going to decrease that. Decrease these quality boosts so it renders a bit quicker. Come on, there we go. So if I get the fog in through around here and then crank the aerial perspective, okay, so what it does is you've got, that's probably just too high. This is how we create our fog on the left here. A high ground density for our fog, so let's say 100%, and it's probably the altitude. We want the altitude, I think, was about 125, where the fog started to peak through this lower valley. There we go. So at the moment that's too warm, but we can actually fix that in post, but I prefer to get it right inside view. I have the other atmosphere that I was using for this, so I'll go in and load that. Or maybe I don't. Nevertheless, we can, oh, I know where it is. It's on my drive, which I lost. Great. That really helps. Okay, so if we increase our density so that we can see our fog to start with, decrease those again. It's too warm, so if we just edit the color of our fog, let's bring it away from our pinks more into between the blues and see what that does. So it's made it too green. It might actually be due to another aspect of our lighting. There you go. So the decay amount was actually affecting our fog color too much. So no matter what our fog color was, because there was so much decay lighting, it was going to make it orange. Come on, update. There we go. But I still want that to be a lot more dense. So let's try 250. Let's go with 130 meters. And I'm just looking on this left side. I'm not worrying about the rest of it. Alright, that's much better. Too strong, but at least I've got it there now. So let's go with 100. Let's go with 120 meters. Perfect. If I then render this, come on. Preview. Let's go with large. There we go. So what I liked in the original atmosphere, the fog that I made, was that because we've restricted our fog's maximum height to just below the top of these hills, you can see the hills become almost exposed, like they are too high for the fog. So what I was doing was simply increasing the density and then lowering the height. So let's go with 110. And let's see what this looks like. So if we compare the two, it's probably still, it can go a lot lower. So let's go with 95. there we go. So we're getting a little bit more exposure on those top ridges. That's essentially how we do that. And then for our final rendering, all we do is render the entire scene as a whole. So I'll just show you at a smaller resolution. So render this entire scene with your chosen atmosphere, obviously with all the plants and such populated. Then it's good to probably save two different versions of your atmosphere, so you get your fog and you can just load it in. If I go back to 95 and 150, and then what I load in is just sorry, it didn't turn down our decay amount. And then if I drag that back out so I can see it, all I want to render is, if I switch back to our image so you can see the shadows, I want the shadow, the largest portion of that left hand shadow to be in fog. So if I come back to here, I want it to be sort of this section here. So I click and drag to out there. Now what you want to definitely make sure of is that you are including the top of your mountain. And the reason for that is that the comparison between these two, sorry, if I go back and render this, you'll notice that because we've changed several settings in the atmosphere editor, this mountain now has a different lighting on it. And to go from a hard fog, like if you just cut it out there, to having a different image for the upper part of the mountain, you'll start getting a huge difference in the lighting, and it will stand out really badly. Okay, so I believe that is us done for part 4. We've got simply sky replacement left and the compositing of our fog in Photoshop, and that's a really quick job. So most of the hard work's done. You've got to render it now, obviously, and that's going to take a while if you're using if you're getting such a big scene. But in terms of rendering, what I tend to do, this is more of a personal choice. I prefer to do it this way. User settings, open up the preview user settings or render settings, and then I enable super sampling if I'm using soft shadows or if I'm using depth of field. But in this case, I'm actually not using either of those. I generally don't change any of the subrays, leave them as they are. You can change the advanced effects quality. I find that this hardly does any difference in terms of render time. It can change the quality sometimes, but I generally don't see anything. The object anti-aliasing and texture anti-aliasing, I usually set these to 1 to about 3 on object, and 1 to 4 on the texels per array. And if you want to control the quality, then you drag these around. Now, texture filtering you can enable. I generally leave it off because it can be a huge time sink in terms of rendering. And the reason I do my renders like this is if I show you at 1600 by 900, I'm just rendering that corner, it'll compute the indirect arrays and then the direct. But what I generally do is I render at twice the resolution that I want, and this gives me two advantages. One, I can work in post with a much larger image, and then two, when I go to actually export for finished product, or at any point in the stage when I want to, I can downsample that to half the resolution. And if you imagine, you've got twice the image size, so it's this big, and you want it to be this big. So for every pixel that you have, you've actually got, for every finished pixel, you've got 4 in the original image. So these then get averaged out, and you get, essentially you just get Photoshop like automatic anti-aliasing. And I prefer to do it that way. So get your renders going, and we'll come back for part 4. You can do some draft renders if you want, just to get it set up. And yeah, we'll put in our sky replacement, which is really simple. We'll do our fog, which is just essentially copying the two renders and then just painting away and using a mask for it, and then we'll have our image done.